Anyway, it's raining outside, so you don't want to go outside. I ask you especially to have a little Rahmanas on me. Those of you who don't know what the word Rahmanas means, little pity. I'm a little rusty at this kind of thing, not having done it formally for the last 3 years. This being my first official weekend, and everything I've done in the last month or so has been unofficial, and I'm really being graded by several folks here this morning. In particular, the guy in the middle with the Hawaiian shirt who just raised his hand. He's representing the official agency and will be scoring later on, so I want you please to just have pity on me, make life easier for me. But I have to tell you that in spite of whatever I do this morning and any mistakes I make, I have an out. The out is that when I went to synagogue yesterday morning, thinking that I was back officially as the interim rabbi, I opened up the Shabbat brochure to discover that Rabbi Tobin and Rabbi Stein are still listed as the rabbis of the congregation. So I'm really not here this morning.
We're just hedging our bets.
And I'm not surprised that you probably had something to do with that. In spite of all that, I beg your indulgence. It really is. It's nice to be here, especially with these folks. The three that are immediately to my right, but that includes also, well, one over there further to my right, and everyone over here to my left, in terms of the grandparents, great-grandparents, etc. And I want to welcome you. I'm going to welcome you in two ways, or twice, I should say. I'm going to do it unofficially at this point by saying Bruchim Habaim, welcome, but I'm going to save that expression also in a few moments to welcome the baby into our midst in a traditional sense, because this really is a very special moment, a simchat or chagigat bat, the celebration of the giving of a name for a daughter, which is a whole lot more than just giving a name. It really represents a covenantal act. And the fact is that covenantal acts in our tradition as Jews is not simply something we reserve for boys when they come into the community, but also for girls as well. And while the ceremony may differ a little bit, the fact is that it is just as important with a daughter as it is with a son, because the covenantal relationship is just as important. So I want to welcome all of you to this celebration. With Annie and with Victor and with all of their family members and others who are gathered here as well with these words. I found a reading in a manual that it was an interesting reading. It sort of struck me as I looked at it this morning. It comes from a book called the Jewish Family Book, written by a person named Sue Ellis, Shir L'Chanan, a song for Hanan. And it's interesting because it reflects on birth and it reflects on the physical act of birth. But at the same time, if you listen to it, I think you'll see that it also connects really very much to the spirit of why we're all here today and what this means. And it very much, if Vivien could understand what we're saying now, I think she would certainly appreciate this. After months at anchor, submerged in half-light and muted sounds, after months alone with your secrets, you opened your mother's womb and burst into a room of bright lights and stark silence. Torn from your mooring with your first cry, you became one with all life. Today, you are joined by a cutting to a people who would repair the universe. Will you now take up your task of salvaging the secrets of Rachum v'Chanun, of compassion and of mercy, lost in the passage from womb to world? And indeed, this is what it is. You know, we take a child and we yank them out of a very secure environment. And some people have done all kinds of deep psychological studies to say that we spend the rest of our 120 years trying to get back to that secure environment, which is an impossible task. The fact is that we're here. And once here, it is our task to make the world a better place in which to live. And until we're able to do that for ourselves, it is the parent's task to help raise that person to a point where he or she can really take on that responsibility. So that's what we're here this morning to join with Annie and Victor as they share with their daughter this beginning of the path towards that direction and towards that obligation that we have. Before I turn to them to share some very important words about the name this morning, I wanted to share a midrash, an interpretation, rabbinic interpretation. that when we got together the other day we talked about and thought that really was very appropriate. It says that when the people of Israel stood to receive the Torah at Sinai, God asked them to give guarantors to receive the Torah. And they went through a whole series of prospective guarantors, the prophets, the sages, the parents, and each one God responded by saying, that's a good guarantor, but it's not quite the right one. And finally, after several offerings, the people turned to God and said, here our children are our guarantors. And the response in the Midrash is that God said, you have now earned the right to receive the Torah. Those are the perfect guarantors, because indeed, the children are what is our guarantee of the future. And for all of those young children here, and parents of young children, and grandparents and so forth, you know exactly what that means.
We wanted to say a few words about your name. Vivien, Jeanette, Bracha, Yehudit.
We are naming you for your grandmother, my mother, Jeanette, Yehudit. I promise you're going to hear much, much more about her as you get older. She was the strongest and most passionate person I have ever known. She was also incredibly gracious and embodied her name, your name, Yehudit, to praise, to thank. For getting credit was never the point of anything she did. She was a true community organizer, a leader whose greatest gift was inspiring others to lead. But her family was the heart of her community, the heart of her hearts. Above all, with my dad,